Hey, welcome back to the channel, welcome back to Wildlands, and today we are embarking on possibly the biggest and certainly the highest piece count of any habitat we have so far. For it is now time for us to approach our mixed habitat right at the entrance. It's the first thing the guests will see as soon as they're inside the zoo, but it's also encompassing the main bridge that takes them from our brand new entrance plaza across to the rest of our habitats. So sit back and strap in as I tell you the long yarn of how this has been probably the most torturous build so far. However, before we do so, this week is going to see the return of us having a specified engagement emoji. And in fact, I've got two for you this week, and I want to know which team you are on in honor of our two new inhabitants of Wildlands. Are you Team Rhino or are you Team Buffalo? And yes, I know it's not a water buffalo, but don't worry. Pop the emoji of your choice in the comments below and we'll see who is going to win, all for the sake of engagement. And with that all done, let's go. So this habitat is situated right behind our main entrance plaza, and it spans across two areas because it will hook round and actually go around the back of what will eventually become our gift shop. So we're kind of working on two areas here, and the idea was I wanted one side to be a dry riverbed, namely the sort of habitat that you'd often see the Indian rhinoceros living in. Then the other side of the bridge we're going to make into a wetland grassy area for our water buffaloes to wallow in. It turned out really well. We've got that nice sort of habitat divide between the two. Now with that done, we're going to start building out ourselves some more walls, and I've recreated all of our Cambodian inspired walls from the last episode. This time we're going to be making them out of bricks, so they're going to be a little bit more orderly. We are going to create, just like before, some decoration panels as well as just some flat brick panels. This is largely where a huge amount of the piece count for this habitat came from, and I will reveal exactly how many at the very end of this video. You will be surprised, because I certainly know I was. In addition to our stacked pots, we're also going to bring in some of these plaster relief walls. These are not overly Cambodian inspired, but I think they do add a little bit of that comical sort of fakeness that you get with a lot of zoo fake scenery. And then with those built, we're going to start staggering them around the edge of the habitat. Again, this took quite a while. I'm not going to make you watch it all. For the visitor facing areas, we're going to bring back our more cobbled together walls from last time. These have got a lot more detail to them. They're much more piece heavy, but they kind of work really well in tying the area together with our previously made habitat. Can't forget our little planting areas, and I initially intended to put some roofs on top of these walls. However, it didn't quite look well, and we'll go into why that is later on when we come to the bridge. However, for now, we're just going to cover it over in some soil, and then when we come around to planting, we will fill those in. Finally, to ensure that we have some good sight lines, I'm going to drop small sections of the wall down, and this would just be viewable from the main path. They're not the main viewing areas, but the idea is you walk along and just catch sight through the gap. Now, one area we're not going to be able to complete today is this outcropping of pathway that leans over as the main viewing platform, largely because what I want to do is going to take so much more time that we're probably going to dedicate an episode to it. However, I can't leave it looking unabandoned. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a wall around the edges, decorate that up with a couple of pillars, and then pop down the start of what will eventually become one of our main decorative flooring for this entire riverbank area. We're only going to do a little bit of that, but it's just going to give us a good starting point so that when we then return to it next week, we've got somewhere to begin from. Now with that area done, we're going to move on to the main attraction of this week's episode, which is the main bridge going through the center of the habitat. And I'm going to use a template that I found of a Cambodian inspired bridge online. To start off, I'm going to build essentially a mold. So because I want to build this out of bricks, I didn't want to kind of go in and just freehand it. That can take longer. So we've built the right sort of shape using the Indonesian walls here in the background, and they will form the inside. There's no point wasting piece count on making a complete inside that will never be seen. So we're going to use that on the inside, and then on the outside, we're going to build up the shape using our faux bricks. Once we've got a base shape sorted, we're going to move it into place and then just start building across. And this very much is just like giant Lego. We are just building brick by brick and getting the shapes that we want. A lot of this was helped out by copious hours spent previously in Minecraft, learning how to make rounded shapes using squares, and it really gives us that sort of blocky, Aztec-y, I know it's not the right area of the world, type vibe. Once the base of the bridge has been completed, we're going to bring our flooring across. And again, you'll see as I go, this path isn't straight, but the bridge is. And that gives us the opportunity to use the path to just hide all of those gaps, as well as raising it just enough to hide those pesky curbs that you can't get rid of once the pathway is in the air. Now we're going to run that all the way down. The path does start to curve downwards, so what you won't see off camera is me slowly angling each bit of path, but we get there in the end and it covers it nicely. Now, so that people don't fall off the side and into the habitat, we're going to run a stone rail all the way down. And we're using the Indonesian bricks for this because even though they are slightly different texture and a slightly different colour, it does give us a little bit of variation. And I like those little square cutout moulds. I think they work really well with the style of the bridge. We'll also use this on our viewing platform over the other side of the habitat. And then to hold up the roof that goes across the top of the bridge, we're going to build ourselves some pillars. Now, you may recall in a previous episode, I mentioned about how I have this awful habit of letting things fall off of the grid. Unfortunately, that also happened again, this time with the bridge. So to get around that, we're going to build each of these pillars on top of a grid piece. And then when it comes to staggering them out, we can just make them automatically jump to where we want them to go. This saved me so much more time, and I can't believe I didn't think of doing it sooner. Realistically, I just need to get better at making sure I remain building on the grid rather than ending up halfway through a build realizing about 2 hours before I'd somehow let it drop. Now we're going to use the painted clay roof, which is quite Asian inspired. However, we are going to bring it back more into that Cambodian styling in a little while. To support it, we're going to run some of the concrete blocks just pillar to pillar to form a roof line. And then we're going to add some of the trim to the edge just to hide some of those curvy edges. A lot of the inspiration pictures I used for this whole area still have this rounded painted clay tile. It's just without the embellishment, it can look a little bit too Chinesey. Now to add a bit more function to these pillars, we're going to start linking them up with archways. We're going to use the twilight door structure or window structures for this. We're going to copy them both sides and they're just going to link the outer pillars to the inner pillars. However, just like with the roofline, we are going to run some of the trim down it as well, just on the top and bottom, just to bring a little bit more of that texturing to the original view. Now on the edge of our walls, again, same idea. We're going to use little pointy ones. This should just discourage children from climbing up on them, but they're not going to be tall enough to distract from the view. Now with the bridge complete, we're going to move on to the areas that are not surrounded by the walls, and that's more of the wetland area of the habitat. And we're going to make ourselves a metal fence, and just a boring metal fence. You've seen me do this millions of times. However, what we are going to do to somewhat hide it, as it is going to be seen from both sides, just behind that wooden fence behind there is the main path, is we're going to clad it in these logs, and we're just going to undulate them up and down to create a nice, more modern type of fence line. This is actually a copy of habitat fencing that I have seen used in rhinoceros habitats before, and these just mean that if they do end up pushing up against it, hitting it, it's a lot softer than just hitting the bare metal. They're less likely to get hurt, but it also adds a little bit of a natural theme while still letting people see through it. Now we're going to run that all the way around this outer area, and you'll be able to see that in the ending cinematics. That does blend in really well. Where we've got these changes in height, we're going to start building up some rocks, and these rocks are mainly for the guest side of the pathway rather than the habitat side. Where we've got some horrible straight lines, like where the bridge and walls meet the floor, we're going to start just building that out with a bit of faux rocks. I've coloured these very similar to the bricks, just so that they blend in a little bit more. And once we've got all that work done, we're going to move on to the next biggest thing, which is our planting. Now, when it comes to planting here, we're going to go quite heavy on the low down plants, not very much trees or big bushes. We're going to start off by making ourselves a little template, and that is going to cover the edge of where our wet grassy area meets the normal grass. So we're going to use the dring grass for the outer area, and then the eel grass is going to be a perfect lush green grass growing in amongst our water. Now what we're about to do with this eel grass is another major factor as to why our piece count has got so high. We are going to run it all the way around the water's edge, submerging it almost just underneath the top of the water. And the idea is I want, as people look at it, to sort of see the grass just poking up, but like there's just these giant wet puddle areas. And this is going to be so that we get a lot of our water buffalo and rhinos wallowing in the water quite often. What I'll do off camera is also submerge a couple of mud pools into this watery area, and that just encourages them to head over to this side of the bridge, but also to spend a lot of time in the water. Now, to bulk out our grass, I'm going to use these water hyacinths. The green and brown adds a nice lower brown texture to the bottom of that grass. And then in areas like around the bridge, we're going to put in some of these giant reeds. Eventually, probably in the next episode when we go back and do all of our tidying, I will be adding some water sources to here where we'll have them coming outside of the bridge and pouring into our wetland. Moving back over the other side of the bridge, and we're onto our more arid and dried up water basin. And we're going to use some of the dry dring grass here. Again, we're using dring grass because the Asia theme, and also because the new restrictions means that they don't like buffalo grass. Don't get me wrong, if I could use buffalo grass, I would. But instead, we're going to make these little grassy patches, just all where the previous water will have ran down. We're also going to use some of these big bushes just to hide in some of that blank area, stop the rocks looking just like rocks. I don't really like these bushes. I know a lot of creators really love them. I find them a little bit too low res, but I think if you put them at the back and don't use them too often, then they kind of work. Forgetting, while we plant up some of our wall areas, our planted areas, I'm probably going to come back and redo a lot of these again, likely next episode, as we're going to have a tidy up of everything. But for now, we're just going to fill it in with some bracken, some grass, and some bushes. And then on the edge of our bridge, we're going to put one of these giant strangler fig trees, and we're going to make it clamber around the rockwork. We're going to make it nice and chunky, and we're going to do that by adding a faux tree and colouring that to the same colour as the roots. Then we're going to cover in both faux roots and the strangler fig roots, just to really bed it into that wall. We will likely end up with probably one more of these on our viewing platform, but a much bigger attempt at it. However, I think for a first attempt, it turned out really well, and I'm really pleased with it. I kind of have a lot of trepidation going in building things like these because I've had issues with these fig roots in the past. But here, it's not really impacting any traversable area as it's mainly on the wall. And also, it really does sort of just tidy up those sort of blank wall edges, and I think it just looks brilliant. Moving inside then. So, I wanted to rebuild a fence structure that I had tried before, for those of you that saw it, from my community zoo episode. And that was a fence that I'd seen in Chester Zoo, which was basically made out of these sort of faux concretey, in Chester Zoo's case, posts, and then branches of wood going between them and having the metal poles embedded within. So I've started off with the faux roots just to give us a nice concretey stonework type base. We're going to use the African branches as the fence topper. And then in between, we're going to run some metal poles. We're going to make them green because, you know, everything in this zoo that's metal and painted is green. So we're going to pop them in and just run them along the length of our fence. Now, we're also going to bend these at weird angles just so they don't look as uniform. And I think the outwardly result at the end was really, really good, considering this is going to be a viewing area as well as a backstage. Inside, where we're not running that fence and where we don't want the viewers to sit, we're going to put in just some normal mesh fencing. You've seen me make this, by this point, 101 times, and it feels like I've made this 101 times. So this is fairly normal, fairly standard, and it's just going to be a couple of metal bars, some mesh in between, and this will be a staff area. We're going to keep some bits back there to feed the animals, with the animals won't have access to it. And then to separate the inside, given we're going to have a large amount of animals in here, we're going to make a couple of bedding area dividers. Now, a lot of inspiration pictures I've seen don't really go for just the square metal bars like you would find in, say, an elephant house. And instead, that just seems to be these sort of metal rods that are just connected together, ideally by what looks fairly flimsily. Now, that kind of makes sense, because I would assume that there's not that much force out of a Rhino if it hasn't got the movement range to get up a bit of speed and weight behind it. Its biggest defense is its bulk. So all we're really going to do is make these little vertical, again, undulating metal poles, and then we're just going to make a couple of buffers again, just to bring a couple of that aesthetic from the outside. We're going to bring that inside with these little concrete blocks that will just give it a bit more reinforcement, and some wooden posts just so that nobody gets hurt if they get bumped up against it. We're going to make a couple of sliding doors, and we're going to go a little bit more generalized than we have in the past, where we're just using these aluminium panels with some rollers on the top, and we're going to use those to section off each of the bedding areas. Obviously, for the sake of Planet Zoo, we're going to leave them open so that the animals still get access to all of the areas. And then what I will do off camera is add a load of educational signs, as well as all of the normal electrical cabling and opening systems that I like to put in my backstage. And with that bit all completed, let's jump on into the cinematics and see where we got to. And there we go. I am really happy. This one was a slog, however, as I said at the start. I have never got so annoyed with building walls like I did with this one. The final piece count, for those wondering, was just over 10,000 pieces for the walls, the bridge, and the planting combined. So it's quite a piece-heavy habitat. It's definitely worth it. I wanted to try building a wall from those bricks for a while now, and I thought this was a great opportunity to do so. That being said, I simply ran out of time to get everything I wanted to do done. And as I mentioned last episode, the guest side of all of these habitats is kind of bare and unfinished. So the plan next week is we are going to avoid putting in a new animal, and instead we're going to go over our riverbank area and just do the final touches. In fact, even as I've been editing here, I have been noting down things that I want to add. We've got a lot of banners and a lot of screens and things like donation bins, signs, statues, just more decoration. I also want to go over the walls that we built today and add a lot more variation. Maybe pop a couple of bricks out, add a couple of bits of plant life to the wall. There's a lot more that can be done, and I think we will go back and do that next time. All in all, though, this habitat has been an absolute triumph of sightlines, and I can't wait to get the gift shop in so you can sort of see it from the water's edge sort of viewpoint. But even so, some of these views coming across this habitat here, I am really, really happy with, and I think with a little bit of care and looking after, we can probably just elevate that little bit more. Let me know what you thought in the comments below. If you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to tippy tap that like button. If you're not subscribed, subscribe, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.